9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff.
Liftoff. Liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Roger, Tower.
Welcome to the Alien Probe Podcast. It is Saturday, November 4th, 2023. I'm Doug and joined again today after you've had a couple weeks off, huh?
Did get a couple weeks off.
We finished up some Serpo. What did we do last time? Oh, yeah, we weren't feeling too well that day.
We bored people within an inch of their life.
300 sightings, 300 deaths on Catalina Island. In 5 decades, or since the 1800s or whatever it was.
Is reported by 2 sick people.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the book and the man, George Adamskis. And a lot of people know the story, if you know UFO lore. I mean, this is part of the history of. We were talking a lot about these days about the. I guess I should look to see how we look. Yeah, I guess that's all right.
We're there.
We're talking today about the Senate and the House and what we're trying to do to get, UFOs and NHIs, non-human intelligences, to the forefront of the public, which I don't know if it's ever really going to happen. Not because I don't believe they're there, but because anyway, we won't go into all that. We're going to talk about what started all this, basically. And one of the people that started with is George Adamskis, and he's got we're gonna start by talking about the man, and what he did, kind of the history of what he did. Then we'll lead into the book, and it talks about some UFO history, which I think we're talking so much about Tic Tacs and things. I think a lot of people that are new just getting into it don't really know the history of how this thing started. It kind of started, and they don't talk about it here, but I think it started with the first nuclear testing, and so to kick it off, George Adamskis was born 17 April 1891 in what is now Poland, the first son of a Polish carpenter, and his wife, who later had 2 more sons and 2 daughters. When he was around 4 years old, the family immigrated to the U.S. and settled in Dunkirk, New York. He left school after the 8th grade, but received private tuition and training in Tibet as a youth.
From 1913 to 1916, don't move that while I'm reading.
Okay.
It's so much fun. I can barely see as it is. Adamskis served in the U.S. Army, and from 1918 to 1919 in the U.S. National Guard. In 1917, he married Mary Shimbursky, who died of cancer in 1954. Adamskis first settled in Los Angeles, California around 1928, where he founded the Royal Order of Tibet in 1932, with which he moved to Laguna Beach in 1934 and taught a philosophy of life, which he called universal law.
He moved to Valley Center near Palomar Mountain in 1940, where he soon became known as a spotter, speaker, and writer about craft and visitors from space. Palomar Mountain remained his operating base until he moved back to the coast. First to Carlsbad and finally to Vista, California. He died of heart failure on 23 April 1965 while staying with friends at Silver Spring, Maryland. That's not fun.
For many years, you see where the 100%, that thing where it says 100? Can you make that a little bit bigger?
Okay, keep going.
Okay. See what happens. It might get too big. Okay, there we go. Okay. There
you go.
All right. For many years, episodes in George Adamskis' early life were shrouded in mystery. But recent research has brought forward new documentation and archival materials that are combined here to shed further light on what was by all means an extraordinary life. Not only for his experiences and the controversy they aroused, but equally for his determination and his unforgiving dedication and commitment to the service that he had taken upon himself.
Well, there's no
Incontrovertible.
incontrovertible proof. There is circumstantial evidence that he maintained a high government or military contacts and met with President Kennedy in late '61 on behalf of his contacts from space.
From space.
There is people that think that not he necessarily, but Kennedy, did have contacts with, extraterrestrials.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that we won't even go there right today.
However, there is no lack of evidence that the significance of his mission rang true with many officials and dignitaries around the world. Not only was he received by Queen Juliana of the Netherlands in 1959, by Pope John XXIII, I have to do the Roman numeral math, in 1963, and various other persons of high social standing. He could also count on the interest and support of the likes of Consul Alberto Perego in Italy, Danish Air Force Major Hans Petersen in Denmark, Desmond Leslie in England, and Professor S.K. Mitra in India, among various others.
Did you notice my shirt?
I've seen the shirt. We have to discuss the shirt.
Yeah, we have to talk about the shirt because the shirt's from Rain Spooner. And so I have to mention that. It's got, this one's an Hawaiian shirt. It's got, some grays, vacation in Hawaii, surfing, and, hanging out generally.
Looking up hula girl skirts.
Is he looking up a hula girl skirt?
He's trying.
Oh, wow, that's weird. I didn't know that. I'll have to be careful about where I wear this.
No.
We saw Matt last night at the Y down on Fulton Avenue in Sacramento. Our co-host, our regular co-host, Matt Whiting, and we saw him perform playing guitar down there with Veronica Lucia, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a really good showing. So at the same time, onward with Mr. Adamskis. We got his picture there.
He looks like a movie star.
Yeah, he's very distinguished looking.
Large eyebrows.
Yeah, they grew him big back then.
Kind of got the Polly Walnuts thing going.
Yeah, and the flying saucer that he's holding up, he says that's a picture of one that he actually took.
Oh, okay.
It's actually the reason I came about this story, and we're going to jump off it kind of looks like the German, and they call them the Haunebu German flying saucers. Mm-hmm. And that's why this struck me as like anyway, well, as we go through, we'll talk more about the history of the flying saucer and that kind of thing. So he maintained to have it being available to the public the first and third Sunday of the month, and at his residence on the slopes of Palomar Mountain, and later in Vista, California, whenever he was not lecturing elsewhere.
Wow. As the timeline in the following pages shows, he worked untiringly his whole life, doing manual labor from a young age through to his final days as a teacher and lecturer, when he continued to write, publish, answer questions, travel, lecture, give interviews, and make new plans to share his information and educate his fellow humans.
Knowing that the fees for his talks were just enough to cover his expenses, his Swiss co-worker Lou Zinstag said George Adamskis was a man who did not relate to money, to the point that she felt he was sure he was reluctant to touch it. The allegations about his motives are left without basis and instead imply more about the motives of the worldview of his detractors.
1940 to 1960, from obscurity to world fame. In March of 1940, Adamskis moves to a property along Star Route 76 in Valley Center, California, about 9 miles from where the Palomar Observatory is under construction. His aim is to establish a spiritual retreat, Kashmir, LA, according to a report about his...
Kashmir Law.
Oh, that's what you wanted to call it? Kashmir Law?
Kashmir Law.
Oh, I thought it was because it was in LA. According to a study about his move in the Santa Ana Register of 26 January, an important part of study equipment to be installed at Kashmir Law is a 40-inch portable Cassegrainian telescope to be constructed by the Tinsley Laboratories at Berkeley. In the event, it seems funds only allowed for the acquisition of a 15-inch telescope.
Oh,
Darn it!
Didn't have enough funding. Yet volunteers as an air raid. In 1941 he volunteered as an air raid warden for his locality when the U.S. entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And in 1944, Adamski and his group moved closer to Palomar Mountain along the Star Route, where his longtime associate Alice K. Wells sets up a roadside cafe, Palomar Gardens. According to Charlotte Blodgett, each member of the group shared a manual labor that went into the effort. And since, in the war's aftermath, heavy restrictions were still in effect regarding materials, anything available had to serve. Yeah, Charlotte brought the money. I mean, I read a little bit about this. She was kind of the financier of this endeavor.
Oh, yeah. In 1944, at Palomar Gardens, a small observatory was erected to house the 15-inch telescope. Would have been way better if it was 40.
Yeah.
Designed in a way which enabled Adamski to study the skies for hours on end.
It was portable, though, so they could bring it.
They could take it out.
Yeah, they could take it to other places.
In 1946, he published The Possibility of Life on Other Planets, in which he posited that the form of physical life elsewhere may be so fine as to be almost invisible to our sight, limited as our sight is to this particular plane of manifestation. That's deep.
Yeah, I mean, there's speculation. I mean, we'll talk, this will come up a little later on, but, you know, it's these things are interdimensional. They're not, that's the reason why we can't really, you can see them on radar, then all of a sudden you can't. So it's weird. That's why we talk about it. So, 9 October in 46, during a meteor shower, Adamski and some friends see a huge cigar-shaped mothership, witnessed also over nearby San Diego by hundreds of others. This sighting, a giant spaceship, was also reported on the radio news and the Los Angeles Daily News. You can see the sun there reporting.
Yeah. In 1947, on June 24th, commercial pilot Kenneth Arnold reports seeing a string of 9 circular type, I remember this story, circular type objects over Mount Rainier, Washington State. On 8 July, the evening editions of the Roswell Daily Record and other newspapers report that, according to eyewitness reports, had crashed around June 14th. These events signaled the start of what became known as the Flying Saucer Area, epitomized in this newspaper front page of July 9th, 1947. In 1947, Adamski also takes his first photographs of a flying saucer as it passes across the moon.
It's interesting because the depiction of the Arnold flying saucers, they aren't really saucers. They're kind of like, they almost look like boomerangs. Yeah. They didn't look like saucers, but that coined the phrase anyway. As the other sightings came about, throughout the years. In 1949, 2 members of the Electronic Marine Laboratory at Point Loma near San Diego invite Adamski to join in on the spaceship photographing in order to collect as much information as possible. Night after night, I stayed outdoors watching the heavens, and steaming cups of hot coffee were incapable of warming me. Once I caught such a cold that it took me many weeks to recover, but still I persisted. Note, in a statement made in 1988 when Adamski had been the butt of ridicule for decades and scientists could not afford to be in any way connected with him, one of the visitors, Mr. Gene L. Bloom, denied Adamski's account of the meeting in the Flying Saucer Review, Volume 34, Number 3. 33 years earlier, he had only denied some of the details in Adamski's account. So some of them, I guess, he agreed with.
From October of 1949, Adamski is invited to talk about the reality of spaceships as a guest speaker for service clubs such as the Rotary in Southern California. It's a note that George Adamski gave many more talks and interviews that are included on this in his book. Those listed are merely indicative of his many public appearances from 1953 onward. In 1949, he published Pioneers of Space, detailing his out-of-body visits to the Moon, Mars, and Venus. In private correspondence, he later explained how one may venture from one place to another while his physical is in one place and he is in another. That is why I have written this book. That was a letter to Miss Emma Martinelli in August of 1950.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's part of, what the government is experimenting with, this, the psychological stuff that, that they can actually, there's been reports that people can actually see from the past. One guy said he was able to go into this psychological, session, and he can see Martians from the past live on Mars. And they were people, they were just big people, large people, and then he could see that. So I don't know if this is kind of that, there's only certain people that can do that. It's not like us, or we can't do it. Have you tried?
I've not tried.
Okay,
no.
just checking.
Not trying to leave my body.
No, okay. In 1950, he publishes his first article about flying saucers in Fate magazine, September of 1950. The sequences below, taken May 6, 1950, is used to accompany Adamskis' second article about the photos of sightings in Fate magazine in July 1951. You can't see it here, but we can see it on the screen. Put my little cursor there. That's Adamski there holding his flying saucer picture. But he's got another picture here of that's the sequence of the moon from 3:30 to 4 a.m. on May 6th shows a strange object suddenly appearing over its face. Note small shadow cast by the object appearing in photograph on the right. So there's the object, and it kind of casts a shadow on the moon. So I don't know. That's kind of weird. Kind of weird and exciting at the same time. There's the 15-inch telescope. And then, there you go.
Okay. November 20th of 1952, there was an encounter with Orthon from Venus, who steps out of a flying saucer that landed in the Coxcomb Mountain Hills in the Colorado Desert in Desert Center, California, and telepathically engages with Adamski as witnessed by George and Betty Williamson, Alfred and Betty Bailey, Alice Wells, and Lucy McGinnis. There's a picture.
Yeah, and he's sitting by his telescope. And the thing about the witnesses later on recanted their story, but there's some speculation that they were coerced and that they actually did see that, but they were coerced in the into denying that they saw it, which is unfortunate. The Orthian looks like a tall, blonde-haired human,
That's what people on Venus look like?
Yeah, the Venusians, those are Orthians. So 24 November 1952, the first newspaper report about the desert encounter appears in the Phoenix Gazette. In a press conference in November 55, Adamski explains, "I will tell you honestly that I, too, would not have come out as much as I have had it not been for the first contact with the four people who were with me. Williamson and the others, Mrs. Williamson and Mr. and Mrs. Bailey, who went on to Phoenix, Arizona, gave the story to the Gazette. Once that came out, I was on the spot completely, and there was nothing else to do. And once you stick your neck out, as you might as well go ahead with it." Right.
So they went and told his story. So then,
they told the story. He didn't really tell the story,
and now he's stuck.
Now he's kind of stuck with it. It's like he didn't want the notoriety.
Yeah.
Or the money.
Well, he got it. I don't know if he didn't get the money, but he got.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any money involved.
Probably not. In October of 1953, Adamski's account of the encounter is combined with a book about the history of ET visitations written by Anglo-Irish author Desmond Leslie and published simultaneously in the UK, USA, and Canada as Flying Saucers Have Landed. This signals the start of Adamski's public mission to inform humanity of the reality of the visitors from space.
Yeah, and there's the same saucer that he's holding on to. December 13th, 1953 takes the most iconic photographs of the flying saucer. A Venusian scout ship appeared over Palomar Gardens. 18 February onward, hotel clerk 426 South Hill Street in Los Angeles is where Adamski usually goes to meet his contacts from Venus and Mars.
You meet at a hotel?
How do we make an appointment?
Okay.
You know?
Do they get a room?
They get a room. They get a room. A conference room. You got to do a conference room. Together, they then drive the car into the desert where a scout ship is waiting to pick them up. These encounters are described in Inside the Spaceships. That'll be the next book we do. We haven't even started this book yet.
Oh,
But
wow.
this is just the precursor to what we're going to talk about in this book. We're going to have a couple episodes on this.
In 1954, Adamski and his group moved the cafe to nearby Palomar Terraces.
Yeah, they build a cafe. They start selling burgers.
The Alien Cafe, huh?
Yeah.
On March 28th of 1954, following the success of Flying Saucers Have Landed, Adamski is invited to give a talk for the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. Is that what MUFON is?
I don't know if I don't know when the actual MUFON was had started.
At the Masonic Temple in Detroit, which draws 4,700 people.
It says something about the Masons, though.
In 1954, he suffered a heart attack due to the strain resulting from the massive public and media interest. Invitations for lectures and correspondence and declines an invitation from the UK on doctor's orders what would have been his first lecture tour in Europe. In a letter dated September 4th, he writes, "I am indeed sorry that the doctors have forbidden me to come to England this year. Through continuous going day and nights as I have been, my health gave way and I was ordered to rest for at least a year." Oh, man.
Wow. Had to rest for a year. Do we have COVID? June through August 54, Desmond Leslie visits Adamski for 3 months during the summer while they're working on Inside the Spaceships. In July 1954, Mary, his wife, Mary Shimberly, she died.
That's sad.
Yeah, that must have been tough on her. He was on the road a lot.
Yeah.
7th and 8th of August 1954, one of the first UFO conventions in California is held at the Skyline Lodge on the slopes of Palomar Mountain. The Flying Saucer Forum featured talks by George Adamski and fellow contactees Daniel Fry and Truman Bethurum, as well as Desmond Leslie, the co-author of the book. The convention draws well over 1,000 people.
Wow. It's a big party.
It's big. It's big stuff.
In 1954, he gives his first talk in Mexico, where he meets with Salvador Villanueva Medina, who had an experience with space invaders. Visitors. I want to play Space Invaders.
The video game.
Space visitors in northern Mexico in August of 1953. Here he also meets Senorita Maria Cristina de Rueda. I don't speak Spanish.
Cristina de Rueda.
You don't know.
I do.
You do not. You're making shit up. The Spanish translator of Flying Saucers Have Landed, who remains a loyal benefactor over the years and whom he visits almost every year during the winter months. Well, yeah, because you get to go to Mexico in the winter when it's nice and warm.
That's what I'm saying. You know, I don't know. It's like a cult. You know, it's kind of weird. It's kind of cult-like. Yeah. You know, although, you know, I'm totally into it.
They have something in common. That's...
Yeah, they have a shared, they have a shared interest, and it's like, you know, MUFON, it's like everybody has a shared interest, but it's about something that is not, that we hope is for real, you know. In 55, Inside the Spaceships, published by, there's some hard names, Abelard Schumann in the U.S. and Nelson Foster and Scott Limited in Canada. The UK edition, published by Arco, follows in 1956. In his Science of Life course, Lesson 11, 1964, he explicitly distinguishes between his travels in consciousness as detailed in Pioneers of Space in 1949 and My Trips in Spacecraft taken bodily. That's interesting.
There would be a big difference. One of them you can just lay in your bed.
Yeah.
And your brain leaves.
Yeah.
And the other one you actually have to physically get in a ship. And who knows if you're going to come back? At least
you know you're probably going to
if you're consciousness, but you know, who knows? Bad things can happen.
It's interesting
lose your mind.
Because that today that is that you know that people talk about that being a reality today, where you just that people, things or whatever from other planets, entities don't even have to be in spaceships. They could just project
right
to Earth and they could be here. You know, they're like you said, they're laying in bed and they're
Mm-hmm.
hanging around here doing whatever. They almost seem like, and when they talk about, apparitions, ghosts, and things, there's discussion now, and I'm seeing it more and more that isn't really dead. Dead people. That's kind of them being here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting.
Either way, it's scary.
Yeah.
April 3rd of 1955, he gives a 30-minute lecture at George Van Tassel's, what a great name, spacecraft convention at Giant Rock in Landers, California. Seeing how the public is increasingly drawn to psychics and mystics who claim to receive messages from space entities with fanciful names and designations, the convention's organizer, George Van Tassel, among them, Adamski decides not to attend gathering of this kind again. Space people use neither position nor name to identify themselves. These are personality, nor do they ever prophesy our future.
So he's kind of distancing himself from this kind of thing.
Because, well, now we're getting into the psychics and stuff that he's...
that's outside my realm of,
Right.
In 56 and 57, late in 56, my colleagues and I were spending a few months in Chapala, Jalisco, Mexico. En route, he films a huge translucent spacecraft hovering above a banana plantation from the highway near San Blas. San Blas. In June 1957, he announces the establishment of an international network, the Get Acquainted program, or some people say the George Adamskis program, aimed at bringing citizens of each nation into closer united friendship. We could use that today.
We could. A lot.
Without discrimination or divisions of any kind. That is kind of a nice concept, a refreshing concept. It'll never happen, but whatever. In October, the first Cosmic Science Bulletin with questions and answers is published and edited by Lucy McGinnis. There's George right there.
Looking
He
handsome.
looks happy.
Yeah.
Dapper. In June 1958, in Cosmic Science Series Part 1, Number 1, Part 4, Adamski writes how, on the first and third Sunday of each month, between the hours of 1 and 4 p.m., it is my custom to talk with the public at my home, give a lecture on topics of interest, and answer questions. He follows this custom, which he began in the early days of Palomar Gardens, throughout his life, whenever he isn't traveling or lecturing elsewhere.
Wow.
The latter half of August of 58, a lecture tour of Washington State. It's interesting. It seems like he's just I don't know if he's getting any funding for this.
Well, hopefully he's getting enough to live on, but doesn't sound like he was charging for anything. In a note on the last page of Cosmic Science Series Number 1, Part 5, Adamski writes, since the response to our inquiry in the previous volume about continuing the questions and answers has not been sufficient to warrant the financial cost involved, this will be the last booklet published. The bulletin continues as the Cosmic Science newsletter on regular U.S. letter-size sheets. What's the matter?
I'm just adjusting that. And we've got telepathy, the cosmic or universal language.
Wow.
Part 1. In 58, he publishes Telepathy, the Cosmic or Universal Language. January 13th of 1959, he leaves for New Zealand on his world lecture tour, where he is invited to speak to countries where GAP chapters have been or were being set up. So this thing actually got started with the people of each country talking to each other. In May of 1959, audience with Queen Juliana and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands at Soesdijk
please say that
Palace
one.
makes headlines around the world. I think I nailed it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's exactly how they would say it.
And there he is again.
Polly Walnuts.
Looking cool.
June 18th of 1959, he returns home from Europe, cutting short his world tour on account of poor health, with lectures in Switzerland, Italy, Austria, and Denmark being canceled. Adamski published at least one more book, Flying Saucers Farewell, in 1961, and continued to lecture widely.
So it looks like he's got 3. Looks like he did about 3 books. At a press conference in March 1965, he predicted that a large fleet of flying saucers would soon descend on Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, Adamski wouldn't be there to greet them. had they actually arrived. He died that April at age 74. Actually, there was an incident where there were a gaggle of flying saucers that were over Washington, D.C., but it was much later.
Well, because they told him, I'm sure. He talked to them. Since his death, Adamski's critics have tended to portray him as a harmless crackpot, a small-time con artist, or perhaps a bit of both. Others, like J. Allen Hynek, took a somewhat dimmer view, accusing Adamskis and others like him of discrediting the entire field of UFO research.
Well, Hynek was Project Blue Book,
right?
And so there's some.
Well,
yeah.
That's funny that it's like, well, you're doing UFOs wrong and you're doing UFOs wrong.
Yeah, well, you're doing UFOs and that
How dare you?
Yeah.
Arthur, he should not have
Arthur.
authors named Arthur C. Clarke, had made the same point years earlier, saying that Adamski and co-author Leslie did a real disservice by obscuring the truth and scaring away serious researchers from a field that may be of great importance.
I don't see how that would scare away regular research. It seems it would bring it to light.
Ego versus ego. Yeah. But Adamski stuck to his story to the end, including the upbeat but somehow ominous message he delivered in Flying Saucers Have Landed. My most urgent message and plea to every person who reads it is, let us be friendly, let us recognize and welcome the men from other worlds. They are here among us.
I mean, the underlying message here is that he wanted peace.
Right. He wasn't, he did have an ego the way he's...
Oh, sure he did.
And he's opening his home. Everybody come and
yeah, but we're talking about, let's all talk about this subject.
Right.
And in a time where it wasn't popular to talk about this subject, quite frankly.
Right.
I mean, you're a crack, like they said, you're a crackpot, or now we can talk about it and wear shirts with pictures on them, and you put things on your, put little aliens on your car or whatever, and nobody really thinks much about it.
Right.
The occasional person just doesn't care. They're kind of like you. It's kind of like, I don't know, there could be something up there, but
people are still afraid to talk, though.
Yeah. Yeah, yes. Not everybody is as free as I am about talking about it.
I mean, you've met people who are
who have had experiences that don't want to talk publicly about it, but they talk to me about it. They talk about it.
Right.
But they don't go to their place of business and talk about it.
Right.
No, you are correct.
And they would prefer that nobody important know that this fact about them.
Well, you know how many people I talk to you from time to time about the people that agree to come on the show, and then at the last minute they get cold feet.
Right.
And even though we can do this anonymously, and
their family advised them.
Yeah, their family advised them it wouldn't be good for their
will be disowning
business or their career, or they won't talk to them anymore, or whatever. But I have had a few of those where they've backed out. So, in the book, chapter 1 is what flying saucers are not. What saucers are not. Ever since the cliche flying saucer was coined, the greatest and most... Anyway, we finished out
That's his biography.
The biography. Now we know about the man. We got the picture. So we know kind of who we're talking about. This is written in the first person. So when we say I, that's George.
You're George. And
you're
I'm
George too.
We're all George.
Ever since the cliche flying saucer was coined, the greatest and most exciting mystery of our age has been automatically reduced to the level of a music hall joke. The comics of vaudeville and the comedians of state and science banded together most successfully to encourage humanity in its oldest and easiest method of escape, to laugh at what it does not understand.
Always. That's what we do. From then on, anyone who said, I have seen a flying saucer, or worse, I believe in flying saucers, was considered a bit of a leg puller or some kind of crank. Despite evidence to the contrary, and there is enough of it to fill many volumes, there is still a widespread notion, hazy and ill-defined as are all popular notions, that flying saucers are some kind of American joke, a newspaper stunt, or the result of something not quite nice.
On top of this comes an even hazier reassurance that the mystery has already been cleared up, that the skies have been purged of those ungodly objects, and there is nothing more to worry about.
Nothing. For this latter notion, we can thank those semi-scientists. I like that. Semi-scientists and
pseudoscientists,
self-appointed experts who have simply failed to study the facts. Too many glib pontifications have been issued to the faithful by those who should know better.
Scores of neatly parceled explanations have been doled out which barely cover a few of the facts. But to say, as their perpetrators say, that they cover all the cases on record is a flagrant untruth for which a higher justice may or may not forgive them. Let me say at the outset that I have devoted the last 2.5 years solely to the investigation of this phenomenon, that I have studied thousands of cases and read reports both ancient and modern, that I have studied with an unbiased mind things that seemed possible and things that seemed impossible, and that I feel as qualified to speak as any expert who, after a few weeks or even days of research, calmly announces the once and for all solution and returns thence to his normal activities.
Yeah, I don't think that's been done on this subject. I don't think anybody's ever said, I know exactly what we've seen and what we haven't seen.
So they make it so it's like it clears it up and then it gets muddy. That's what's been happening like that since the beginning.
Let me say also that if I write of the flying saucer mystery in a light or easy style, it is not because I do not seriously mean what I say. On the contrary, I take flying saucers extremely seriously, but I deplore pedantry and, like the ancient Toltecs, I find the serious things of life a cause for joy and pleasure rather than for pompous gloom.
Oh, wow.
That's a great band name.
What's pedantry? Do you know what that means?
Like pettiness.
Pettiness.
And saying that you're right.
And lastly, though I would prefer to use the ancient names for the sky discs, such as cars celestial, vimanas, and fiery chariots, I use the modern abomination.
Wow.
Flying saucers throughout this volume, merely to avoid confusion. Well, it's not flying saucers anymore. It's UAPs.
Yeah, they've come up with many names, but vimanas and I like fiery chariots. That's a great name.
That's a good band name too.
Oh yeah, I know they're
It's better than what's the dolphin one?
They're opening for pompous gloom.
Dolphin.
Killed by
dolphins.
Love that.
That's a great band name.
You got a sticker somewhere.
I do. I got it. I don't know if I'm going to put it on my car or not. I'll put it on your car.
No, you're not putting it on. I'm too old for that. I don't know who they are. I would like to devote.
You met the guy. You met him last night.
I met the guy. He's lived less time than I've worked for the state. That's horrible. I would like to devote little time to proving or disproving the reality of these wonderful flying objects. In fact, I would like to get right down to essentials without further ado. But for those who have heard of saucers only by hearsay or read of them in the popular Sunday papers, that would prove a little unsatisfactory. So I shall dedicate the first part of this book to an account of what has happened up to the time of writing.
Yeah, and we'll be covering some of the incidents. I've heard all of these, and they're great stories. Let me say once again that although I quote less than 200 incidents, these have been selected from nearly 2,000 cuttings, reports, articles, manuscripts, and ancient documents.
I want an ancient document.
I would too. Supplied to me by somebody has them. Supplied to me by kind helpers from many countries this side of the Iron Curtain. To quote them all would require a volume the size of a city telephone directory.
For anybody who doesn't know, there used to be something called a phone
book.
The phone book. We haven't seen one of those in a while.
Yeah, thankfully.
For the past 18 months, barely a single day has gone by without flying saucers. He doesn't like that term. Why is he using it? Being reported somewhere in the world.
He is using it.
I know, but I think he should have not used it.
With flaming chariots. He's going to refer to as flaming chariots throughout the book.
The FCs. But I am being modest. On some days, there have been as many as 10 different sightings in different places. And if a thing is seen daily, week after week, month after month, by ordinary people in free countries, then it follows that the thing in question must surely exist.
Yeah, and it's more than that now, more than 10 a day. MUFON has just got the directory. I don't know how many there was, but there's tons.
Wow.
It's us, Florida, and Texas have the most. It's interesting.
Shocking.
Yeah, there was a general one time that said it was those. I don't know, it wasn't those states, but there was another state that had the most at the time. It was in the 50s or 60s, and he says, "Yeah, I look at the alcohol consumption in that state; it's really high.
Yeah.
It's no higher there than it is anywhere else." So.
Wisconsin is the highest, I think.
Is it really?
It's
those
cold.
winters.
It's cold. Yeah.
It's those winters.
It's
yeah.
cold.
Do you remember this amusing story? It came on. Do you remember this? June of 1947, 3 days before Arnold's experience over Mount Rainier, a man named Dahl was out in the Tacoma Harbor Patrol boat near Maury Island. He looked up and saw 6 large discs about 2,000 feet above him. 5 of them were slowly circling, one that seemed to have difficulties.
Slowly they sank to within 500 feet of the sea without a sound or a whisper. Then suddenly there was a loud boom from the central disk, and out fell a light and a dark metal object. Fragments landed in the water near the island, causing a loud hissing noise, whereupon the whole flight rose and shot off to sea.
3 days later, Maury Island was visited, and layers of slag-like substance were found there. Reports circulated that dark and light-colored metal discs were among the droppings. Air intelligence was brought in and announced ex cathedra, although I don't know what that means, through the vocal organs of a Major Sanders that the metal was just slag. That must mean a debunking thing.
Is it UFO poop?
Yeah.
Neither the Major nor Dahl seem to have noticed that slag, cinders, blue ice, jelly-like stuff, and clinker have been recorded as arriving in large quantities on this planet in utterly unexplained circumstances for the last 300 years.
With the authority derived from one's office or position, there came a variation. Then came a variation. Experienced airmen began to see them. Back to Maury Island, because they're jumping off Maury Island, right? To expound on that story, the pieces of slag hit the boat. There was a boat out there that directly observed the incident. They dropped these pieces on the boat, killed the dog. The kid broke the kid's arm that was on the boat. It got up to the shore. The Air Force sent in a B-25 from Hamilton Air Force Base, it's now closed, but it was in the Bay Area in San Francisco Bay. So they send in 2 pilots and 2 crewmen there to collect the pieces of, they wanted to get the pieces of slag. The ship that was, and they didn't, there was others, I think there was 3 or 4 of these flying saucers. One was in distress, and it was kind of wobbly, and that's the one that was shooting out the pieces of the slag substance. So it finally righted itself and flew off. But the B-25, there was a box, so somebody collected a box of the slag that they wanted to bring back. So they get the box, they load the box on the B-25. The B-25 all of a sudden explodes on the way back. Doesn't quite make it out of Washington. It blows up. One of the crewmen escaped and parachuted out. I mean, it was the co-pilot got killed, and then one of the crewmen got killed. One survived. He ended up being a fry cook in Nevada somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And they can't, and I'm always saying, well, why didn't we ever talk to this guy? Right. He's probably dead now, because it happened so long ago. But that story was, he didn't probably, this came out, probably after he was dead. He didn't know about all these things, but it was a really weird, in fact, one of those new UFO hunter things. They went out to try to find the pieces of they of course removed most of the B-25 because at that time that would have been technology that we didn't want out, even though by today's standards it's a nothing. But and they wanted to find the slag. They wanted to find the box of slag, and they never did. So anyway, just thought before, because he jumps right out of that, and I thought as I read through, I go, I got to tell the rest of that story. That was a good story. Then came a variation. Experienced airmen began to see them. 2 airline pilots, Adams and Anderson, were flying their DC-3 130 miles from Memphis to Little Rock on the night of March 31st, 1950, when a huge glowing flying saucer zoomed down at terrific speed. to investigate them. And my thought when I read this was that it must have came out later where they were pulling flight statuses of pilots. Because in the 50s, they were, oh yeah, I just saw a flying saucer.
Right.
And it became, later on, it was, now, if you reported it, all of a sudden you're not flying.
Right.
It's like you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but before that, we're going to find here that they've actually, it wasn't happening in the early days.
On the central cupola, I never know how to pronounce that, there was a bright blue, white flashing light, either a signal or part of the propelling mechanism. And on the lower side, the airline pilots observed a row of 8 or 10 brilliantly lighted portholes. They thought they were portholes, but admitted that they could have been vents through which some kind of powerful energy was flowing.
I've been a skeptic all my life, said one of the crew members, Adams, in his report. And what can you do when you see something like that? We were both flabbergasted. Both pilots were slightly blinded by the glare. It was the strongest blue-white light I've ever seen, said Adams.
Something just as bright but quite different in construction was seen by Eastern Airline pilots Childs and Whitted early in July of 1948 on a flight near Montgomery, Alabama. A large aerial submarine 3 times the size of a B-29 came alongside and circled their craft.
Oh, that's big.
Yeah.
It was torpedo-shaped and glowed all over with a weird dark blue light. It's interesting, torpedo-shaped. That's like the Tic Tac, kind of like the Tic Tac thing. That's bizarre. There was double row of ports or vents along the side from which came an unearthly white light. After inspecting them for some moments, the thing suddenly let out a sheet of flame 50 feet long, turned up its nose at an abrupt angle, and shot off at about 700 to 1,000 miles per hour, rocking the sedate DC-3 with its mighty blast. This is where I kind of have a problem.
There shouldn't be flames.
There's no flames.
They don't get flames?
No,
It's not like a jet car.
Or it's something else, or it's something earthly that's, that breathes oxygen and, uses propulsion of that type. I'm not going with
You're not going with the flame?
Nah, I'm not big on that, but it's I don't know. I'm not going with flying saucer necessarily. Maybe it's something we built that we looked like a flying saucer, and that was the only way we could put the the propulsion in it.
Right. You'd think we wouldn't fly it at our people though. Earlier still, 9 flying saucers in loose formation were seen by Captain E. Smith of United Airlines, 8 minutes flying time away from Boise, Idaho, on July 4th of 1947. Smith and his co-pilot, Ralph Stevens, saw the disc silhouette against the late evening sky and give me words. First thought they were aircraft.
Give me words.
Give me my words.
Notice, please, that they were silhouetted. Fireballs, illusions, and refractions of light do not produce dark silhouettes against the evening or any other sky. 4 more saucers joined the group, giving the 2 pilots and their stewardesses time to observe them thoroughly. They were flat and roundish, they said afterwards, and larger than ordinary aircraft. I like the fact that he's kind of doing research.
Mm-hmm.
He's where there's the government doing the research, and there's this guy just kind of laying it. George is just laying it out.
A huge round disc flying on its edge came alongside a Chicago-bound plane on the night of April 27th, 1950. I've got one. Captain Adikis, the airline pilot. You don't know. The airline pilot said it looked like a giant wheel. It was very smooth and streamlined and glowed evenly with a bright red color, as if it were heated stainless steel.
It appeared to fly on edge like a wheel going down a highway. It was intelligently controlled, either by repulse mechanism or by thinking beings. For each time Adix tried to bring the plane nearer, the object turned away from him, keeping perfect distance until it decided it had seen enough of the comic terrestrial contraption lumbering along at a mere 200 miles an hour. You're going too slow. And shot off at a sudden burst of speed, zooming down to 1,500 feet, where it passed over a place called South Bend and disappeared in the distance.
So he's given them the UFO's disdain.
Yes.
They have disdain for our people.
It's such bad old technology and bad technology.
Then came the tragedy. Red glow in the clouds over Godman Field, Kentucky. A disk the size of the Pentagon, holy crap, lurking silently above a fighter base. A construction dwarfing the Queen Mary, supported by dull orange flames that lit up the cloud base and caused Captain Mantell of the U.S. Air Force to be dispatched in his tiny pursuit plane to investigate.
Yeah, he had a muss. He's flew in a muss. I know this story too. When Mantell found it, his voice came over the radio, full of excitement. It was immense, he said, a colossal metallic thing, 500 to 1,000 feet in diameter, and cruising at 250 miles per hour. He was going to try to overtake it. As soon as he sighted it, or sensed him, the giant began climbing at 400 miles per hour. It accelerated faster than any jet, and Mantell went streaking up in pursuit.
The next news of Mantell was that the wreckage of his plane had been found in tiny pieces, scored by peculiar deep lines as if he got into a shower of some terribly powerful, unexplainable something, as though he had flown into the tremendous exhaust stream, or worse, against which no terrestrial metal could survive.
Ex cathedra spoke authority. Another debunking term, I guess. First, Mantell had been chasing the planet Venus. Will some kind of illusionist kindly explain how the planet Venus could appear at a disk 500 feet, as a disk 500 feet across, going at 200 miles per hour, afterwards climbing rapidly and emitting orange flames?
Later, we read of a new official explanation that Mantell had hit a skyhook meteorological balloon and crashed.
There we go with the balloon.
Those damn
again.
balloons. Well, say he had. Would it tear his plane to pieces? I think not.
I'm quite willing for anyone who will pay my expenses to pilot a fighter plane through a skyhook balloon any time of the day or night and observe the results without very much fear of hurting myself. But when it has a skyhook ever cruised at 250 miles per hour or risen sharply at 400 miles per hour with orange flames, etc., into the bargain?
But officially, Mantell had chased the planet Venus. Why the hell would he chase the planet Venus? Metamorphosed later into a skyhook balloon, and thus alas met his death.
We're fighting the same fights today with this stuff. Another theory followed about a mirage or magnification caused by layers of hot air or cold air, or something no one knows anything at all about. But in that case, why doesn't this sometimes magnify the sun, distort the moon, stretch out the stars? Why always pick on poor old Venus?
Poor Venus. This Venus idea makes it very hard to understand a sighting at White Sands Rocket Testing Ground, New Mexico, where a flying saucer was tracked by radar and found to be cantering along at a mere 18,000 miles per hour. What's this? We've had radar echoes from the moon, but not yet from Venus, so far as I'm aware.
The back to Mantell, so he was flying his Mustang, and they said that one of the things was they discovered, I think, that at 15,000 feet, he wasn't on oxygen. He didn't have oxygen in the plane. So at 15,000 feet, you literally pass out. So they said one other story came out on top of the other ridiculous stories, is that he simply passed out.
Okay.
And the plane just crashed.
Okay, but they said it was ripped apart, not...
Yeah, and to that point, they said that when they went to discover the crash site, the thing was ripped to shreds. So if he just hit the ground, it would just be him augering into the ground, not stuff fluttering all over the place. So he hits... one story is the thing shot at him with something, a laser beam. I don't know. But it's interesting.
Do you think you're being observed by there's a Prime truck that's been parked in front of our house?
Yeah, they're watching.
Is this how the government...
Yeah, they're concerned about us. I get a lot of hits from Los Alamos. And what's the other one? Where the Pentagon is.
He was just typing away on his phone. I think he's recording on you.
He's on Facebook. Yeah. And I get a lot of hits on... we get a lot of hits on Washington, D.C., get a lot of hits from where the Pentagon, Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of weird. I think, like you said, you thought it was automated. You thought it bots or something, which I would expect to have a lot more, results if they were bots. Far from solving the mystery, radar is only added to it. Sometimes invisible flying saucers have produced the type of radar echo that indicates a solid body moving at high speed. At other times, when the flying object itself was visible to the eye, it has produced the kind of indefinite image on the radar screen associated with ionized air or radioactive clouds. At other times, solid-looking saucers have given clear, solid body echoes and have tracked at speeds of up to 20,000 miles per hour.
That's really fast.
Yeah, they're real quick, and it's like, wow, how could anything survive in there? Could be drones. Maybe there's no biologicals inside. Maybe there's just, drones in there.
The American papers have contained many such reports over the last few years, and the U.S. Air Force, it's a USAAF, what am I saying?
United States, Army Air Force.
Army Air Force, okay. Has issued a special equipment to various units in an attempt to solve this mystery.
And that's what it was called before. It was just
okay.
Air Force. In England, the RAF has had incidents, most of which occurred during large-scale official exercises. The two I shall now quote as examples come from officers personally known to me. Reasons oblige me to withhold their names. One is a scientist, and the other one is a son of a famous London editor and theater critic. So we don't want them talking about it.
He's making all the dogs go crazy. One, the editor's son, told me that while on duty in November 1952, he tracked a vast object flying in cloud from the River Humber in Yorkshire to the Thames estuary. It covered the 200 miles in a matter of 2.25 minutes. Wow,
that's crazy. The other, the scientist, was in command of an East Coast radar post during exercise Ardent. At 3:20 a.m., his attention was drawn to a blip on the radar screen which suggested a flight of 10 closely packed aircraft leaving the English coast and heading towards Holland.
The incredible speed of these object made direct measurement of their speed impossible, but calculations twice checked showed them to be shifting along. He loves his little... Yeah. He's got a thesaurus. At 2,100 miles per hour.
Worse was in store. When they or it reached the Dutch coast, the screen went blank. The thing had physically disappeared, which even a schoolboy knows to be impossible. The scientist's explanation, which is the only explanation to our limited knowledge, is that the thing dematerialized, or rather translated itself into a higher octave of matter quite beyond our present comprehension, which is, and I put that in there, that, it might be this might be one of those interdimensional situations, or, a radar just back then isn't just...
Yeah, it wasn't...
Sophisticated.
It was new. Unfortunately, most scientists and other experts are not willing to be so broad-minded. Saucers offend them because they cannot be conveniently pigeonholed into what is known and accepted.
From the time of Captain Mantell's tragic death to the present day, the experts have told us glibly one thing after another, contradiction following contradiction, until our heads, like the saucers, are spinning in the air.
Spinning.
It's just what they're doing today. They just keep kicking the can down the road. Don't give us any answers. Treat us like 4-year-olds. Just keep it up.
They say that flying discs are the following: small specks of dust before the eyes, which look like large objects far away. Mass hysteria. Not so much mass hysteria as collective illusion, says the Australian Institute of Applied Psychology, in a kindly attempt to soften the blow.
Apparently is less ignoble to be suffering from collective illusion than from mass hysteria. Spots in front of the eyes, red blood corpuscles inside the eyes, cobwebs flying high, meteors, distant headlights, Venus, the Perseids, that's the meteor shower that occurs every August, balloons, ionized air, unionized air, cold air, hot air causing refraction at levels just like hot air. I saved this one for you.
Nuts, says Dr. Menzel of Harvard University in an exclusive interview for an American magazine. Nuts, ejaculatory rather than vegetable, just in case you're wondering. Sex, say some progressive psychiatrists. Well, up in their desire trauma. We thought sex would creep into it sooner or later. And lastly, from Russia, where because Stalin failed to invent them, they are a case of pure war-mongering psychosis, according to Professor Kukarkin of Moscow.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? So, we're coming up on an hour. That was a lot better than the last time we did we did this. And thanks everybody. We're gonna go through this book. I do enjoy Adamski's writing, and in us visiting the history of the phenomena. I think the people that have just picked up since the Senate hearings have just started wondering about what started it all. Might be interested in hearing what's happening. So we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Alien Probe Podcast. We welcome comments, questions, or requests to alienprobepodcast@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook. Check out our website at alienprobe.net, Twitter and Instagram at alienprobepod. As a reminder, anybody that wants to come on as a guest, would like to talk to you about this, today's UFO situation or an experience, hit us up on our website, alienprobepodcast@gmail.com. Check us out. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks again, Deb, for joining me.
Thank you.
That was a lot less painful than the last one we did.
The last one sucked. That's okay. It has to happen once in a while.
Watch the skies, everybody. And I've got the Apollo countdown. I'm sure you heard the Apollo countdown in the beginning. That's remembering Dr. Bill.